A treasure hunt is underway in the Netherlands to find valuables worth millions hidden by Nazi soldiers during World War II. It's been sparked by the publication of an old map by the Dutch National Archive. It's believed the document marks the spot where German soldiers...
Imagine a real-life treasure map, declassified after decades, pointing to a fortune buried by the Nazis. This isn't a film plot. It actually happened in the quiet Dutch village of Ommeren. What followed was a frantic, modern-day gold rush, with hunters descending on the woods, convinced they were days away from riches. But when they finally unearthed the legendary boxes and looked inside, they were left utterly speechless. The truth they uncovered was far stranger and more haunting than anyone could have ever imagined. It all started not with a bang, but with a whisper from a forgotten file in a quiet archive on a very ordinary day. Imagine a researcher whose life is usually measured in dusty documents and the soft rustle of paper. They'd seen 1,000 pieces of history, but today is different. Today, the fingers, which are usually so steady, tremble just a little as they smooth out a single, crumbling piece of paper. This isn't just any old map. It feels different from the moment it leaves the file. It's a photocopy, but you can still feel the age on it, the ghost of the original. The paper is yellowed like an old bruise, and there, drawn not in printed ink, but by a human hand, is a series of lines, roads, and in the center, a small, deliberate X. Next to it, a name, Ommeren. But this X isn't marking a picnic spot. This map was drawn by the Nazis, specifically by the Buitendienst, the loot service. Their job wasn't to fight on the front lines, it was to systematically steal, plunder, and take whatever they wanted from the lands they occupied. This map wasn't a guide for tourists, it was a receipt for stolen goods. And for decades, it had been sitting in a Dutch government archive, declassified but completely overlooked, a sleeping secret. The air in that room grows cold. It's not the air conditioning. It's the weight of what this piece of paper represents. It feels less like a discovery and more like an invitation to a party that ended in disaster nearly 80 years ago. Or perhaps a warning, because some secrets are buried for a reason. The story the map tells begins in the fiery chaos of 1944. The Allies are advancing, and the German war machine is crumbling. In the city of Arnhem, a bank used by the Germans is bombed. Amid the smoke and rubble, these Buitendienst soldiers see not destruction, but an opportunity for one last massive score. They smash their way into what's left and a nearby bank vault, and they grab everything they can. We're not talking about paper money here, we're talking about the good stuff, the stuff that lasts. Gold coins, heavy and cold, jewelry, diamonds that glitter even in the gloom, priceless watches, family heirlooms, a fortune, ripped from its rightful owners and stuffed unceremoniously into 4 heavy ammunition boxes. With the Allies closing in, they can't carry this treasure, so they do what people in trouble have always done. They bury it. They choose the quiet, unassuming woods near the village of Ommeren. And one of them, perhaps the officer in charge, carefully draws this map, a key to a royal fortune, hidden beneath the peaceful Dutch soil. Then, they vanish into the chaos of the war's end, taking the truth with them. All that's left is this phantom in the archives, a ghost of greed and desperation, waiting to be found. For decades, that's where the story stayed, a secret between the map and the archive. But then, in 2023, the Dutch government decided to publicize it. They released this piece of the past into the wild, into the most powerful and chaotic network the world has ever known, the internet. The news article hit online, and it was like throwing a lit match into a room full of petrol. The quiet digital silence was shattered in an instant. The genie wasn't just out of the bottle, it had exploded out. For history buffs, it was the ultimate cold case, suddenly cracked wide open. For adventurers, it was a real-life pirate treasure map. But for the people of Ommeren, it was something else entirely. Imagine an elderly villager who has lived his whole life in the shadow of stories about the war. His parents whispered about the German soldiers, the fear, the occupation. He looks out of his window at the same familiar trees he's seen since he was a boy, and he sighs a deep, weary sigh. He knows what's coming. The peace, so hard won, is about to be broken. Meanwhile, in a city far away, a treasure hunter sees the article on his phone. His eyes light up with a fierce, hungry light. This isn't just history to him, it's a lottery ticket. It's the answer to all his problems. He immediately starts planning, looking at flights, researching metal detectors. The dream of instant wealth is a powerful, blinding drug. And then there are the descendants, people whose families had their lives torn apart by the war, who maybe lost everything. They see this news and feel a complicated, painful stir of emotions. Is this the loot that was stolen from their grandparents? Could this be a twisted path to some kind of justice, or at least recovery? It's a ghost from a past they never knew, knocking loudly on their door. The quiet village of Ommeren, a place where not much usually happens, was suddenly the center of the universe for every dreamer, every chancer, and every historian on the planet. The weight of the past, which had lain gently over the fields and woods, suddenly became heavy, pressing down on the present. The anticipation was a physical thing, a crackle in the air, and it didn't take long for that anticipation to turn into action. Within days, a car with German license plates, a cruel irony in itself, slows to a crawl on a country lane just outside Ommeren. The driver doesn't look at the beautiful scenery. His eyes are fixed on the tree line, scanning, calculating, searching for a spot that matches a picture on his phone. The hunt had begun. The land, which had slept for so long, was now being watched, and it, in turn, seemed to watch back, remembering everything. Within days, the quiet countryside around Ommeren was transformed. The peaceful woods and frosty fields, once the domain of birds and the occasional cyclist, were suddenly overrun. It was no longer a landscape, it was a dig site. Dozens of people descended upon the area, and they brought with them a feverish energy that felt completely alien to this tranquil part of the world. The ground told the story first. It became a pockmarked battlefield of human ambition. Neat grass was torn up, replaced by mounds of fresh, dark soil and hastily dug holes. The air, usually filled with the sound of the wind, was now a constant chorus of electronic chirps and beeps from a symphony of metal detectors. Underneath that was the relentless sound of shovels biting into the earth, a modern, industrial assault on a secret that had been kept quiet for generations. The sense of competition was palpable. These weren't friends on a shared adventure. They were rivals, each with their own equipment and their own private dream, casting suspicious glances at anyone who wandered too close to their chosen patch of dirt. If you looked closely, you could see the different kinds of hope that drove them. There was the pragmatist. This was often a seasoned treasure hunter, a person who treated this like a military operation. They didn't just wander aimlessly. They came with rolled-up maps, sometimes even on tablets, overlaying the old Nazi sketch with modern satellite imagery. Their metal detectors were top of the range, capable of discriminating between different types of metal. They moved in slow, deliberate grids, their faces etched with concentration, believing that success was simply a matter of process and patience, of eliminating the impossible until only the treasure remained. Then there was the dreamer. This was often someone who had seen the news and felt a life-changing pull. For them, this wasn't a hobby, it was a destiny. You could see them digging with a frantic, almost religious fervor. Their hands might be blistered, their clothes caked in mud, but their eyes shone with a zealous light. Some had taken time off work. Others, in the most extreme cases, had quit their jobs entirely, convinced that a fortune in diamonds was just one more spadeful of earth away. They were betting their present on a phantom from the past. And watching it all, often from their garden gates or from the windows of their homes, were the locals. These were people whose families had lived here for decades. They knew the stories their grandparents had told, not glamorous tales of treasure, but grim memories of occupation, of fear, of lost friends and family. To them, this frenzy wasn't exciting. It was a deeply disrespectful spectacle. It was a gold rush playing out over a grave site, a violation of a peace that had been hard-won. They watched with a mixture of fascination and appalled curiosity, wondering how long it would take for the invaders to realize they were digging up more than just soil. The tension built with every electronic squeal from a detector. A high-pitched shriek would cut through the noise, and immediately heads would snap round. A small crowd would gather around the lucky hunter, their breathing held in a collective, anticipatory silence. The digger would drop to their knees, scraping away soil with trembling hands. The moment of truth. And then, the reveal. A rusted piece of metal, a twisted shell casing from a long-forgotten firefight. A wartime helmet, corroded and full of mud. The shared gasp of hope would collapse into a sigh of collective disappointment. But strangely, this failure never dampened the spirit. It only fueled it. You would hear the whispers, "The next one will be it." Every beep held the same promise, the same heart-pounding potential. The mania was feeding on its own disappointment. Inevitably, the chaos attracted the attention of the authorities. The police and local council officials arrived, their uniforms a stark contrast to the mud-stained clothes of the hunters. They declared the area off-limits, citing public safety concerns and the importance of preserving any potential historical finds. For a brief moment, it seemed the madness was over. But the genie couldn't be put back in the bottle. The lure of the treasure was too powerful. As dusk fell, a new shift of hunters arrived. Under the cover of darkness, with only the bobbing beams of their headlamps to guide them, figures continued to flit between the shadows of the trees. The hunt had not ended. It had simply been driven underground, becoming more secretive, more desperate, and far more dangerous. While the initial gold rush had been a chaotic free-for-all, a spectacle of desperation, what happened next was different. This was not about luck. It was about calculation. As the crowds thinned out, discouraged by failure and the watchful eyes of the authorities, a smaller, more determined group moved in. These were the pragmatists, the ones who had been studying the map, not as a cartoon treasure chart, but as a historical document. They spent days not digging, but walking. They cross-referenced the faded lines on the Nazi map with modern geological surveys and satellite imagery. They accounted for decades of soil erosion, fallen trees, and changed footpaths. They realized that everyone else had been looking for obvious landmarks, the lone oak tree, the distinctive bend in the river. But the soldiers who buried this loot were in a hurry. They wouldn't have chosen a spot that was easy to find on a modern, clean map. They would have used a fleeting, temporary feature. Their search narrowed to a slight, almost invisible depression in the ground, near what was now little more than a faint indentation in the earth, a path long since abandoned. It was a place that felt forgotten, and here, their advanced metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar finally gave a signal that was different from all the rest. It wasn't the scattered chatter of shrapnel. It was a dense, solid, and rectangular echo from deep below. The air around their small team grew still and heavy. The usual bird sounds seemed to fade away. This was it. They could feel it. The work began with a grim seriousness. The first scrape of a spade into the cold earth was a sound of finality. They took turns, digging in a steady rhythm, their breaths forming plumes in the chilly air. The smell was of damp soil, decayed leaves, and history. With each shovelful, the hope tightened. Then, about a meter down, there was a dull, metallic thud. It wasn't the sharp crack of hitting a rock. It was a hollow, resonant sound that made everyone freeze. The shovels were thrown aside. Now, it was a delicate operation. They dropped to their knees, swapping heavy tools for small hand trowels and brushes. They scraped and swept like archaeologists at a sacred site. Fingers, now bare and numb with cold, carefully clawed at the stubborn soil. The suspense was agonizing. What was it? A buried piece of farm machinery? A long-lost water pipe? Then, a glimpse of something. Not a random shape, but a sharp, manufactured corner. More brushing revealed a flat, metal surface, pitted with rust, but unmistakably solid. Then another corner. It was a box. A precise, rectangular metal box, exactly the size and shape of a German ammunition case from the Second World War. Word travels fast in a field full of treasure hunters, even the discouraged ones. A whisper on the wind, a quiet phone call, and slowly, one by one, figures emerged from the surrounding woods. They gathered around the growing hole, not as a rowdy mob, but in a silent, tense circle. The competition was forgotten. At that moment, they were all just witnesses to history. The final moments of the excavation were conducted with a strange, reverent care. Ropes were carefully slid under the box. It was heavier than they expected, a solid, stubborn weight. With a collective, grunting heave, they lifted it from its earthy grave. For the first time in 78 years, sunlight touched the metal. It was caked in mud and rust, but it was real. The finder held it for a moment, feeling the immense weight, not just of the metal, but of everything it represented. The war, the theft, the secrecy, the decades of silence. This was the moment everything had been leading towards. The box was carried like a relic and placed on a tarpaulin spread on the grass. Everyone crowded in closer, a tight circle of breathless anticipation. The latch was a simple metal clasp, but it was fused shut by decades of corrosion. A debate started, hushed and urgent. Should they open it here? Now? Should they call the authorities? But the temptation was too powerful. The mystery was literally right in front of them. Someone produced a crowbar from their kit. The metal screeched in protest, a sharp, ugly sound that tore through the quiet of the woods. It was the sound of a secret being forced open. The rusted latch gave way with a final, snapping crack. All eyes were fixed on the lid. There was a pause, a last, collective intake of breath, and then the lid was pried upwards. The inside of the box was not what anyone expected. There was no glitter, no sparkle, no blinding reflection of gold. There was no rich, warm color of polished wood or leather jewelry cases. There was no carefully packed fortune. The crowd leaned in, their faces, once alight with excitement and greed, now etched with a deepening confusion. The initial looks of anticipation melted away, replaced by blank stares. Their eyes scanned the interior of the box, not believing what they were seeing, or more accurately, not believing what they were not seeing. No one spoke. No one cheered. No one even sighed. The silence that fell over the group was profound, absolute, and utterly bewildering. It was a silence so heavy and complete that it seemed to swallow all the sound from the world around them. After all the digging, the hoping, the dreaming, and the madness, they were left with nothing but a crushing, speechless silence. The silence was broken by a storm of whispers. Where was the treasure? The empty box made no sense, and the questions came tumbling out, each more troubling than the last. Was the map a complete lie? A deliberate piece of misinformation planted by the Nazis to waste Allied time and resources in the war's final days? It was a clever, cynical theory. Or had someone else beaten them to it? Maybe the very soldiers who buried it crept back after the war to reclaim their prize. Or perhaps a lucky local farmer, digging in the 1950s, stumbled upon the fortune of a lifetime and kept the secret, spending it slowly, quietly, never saying a word. But the most chilling theory was one of pure spite. What if the loot was never meant to be recovered? In the face of certain defeat, burying it was a final, malicious act of denial. If they couldn't have it, then no one would. The treasure became its own tomb. While the treasure hunters grieved for their lost gold, an archaeologist arriving on the scene saw something entirely different. For them, the empty box was the treasure. It was a primary source, a frozen moment of pure desperation and chaos. Its hollowed-out interior told a more powerful story than any stack of gold bars ever could. A story about the utter futility of war and plunder. As the last of the seekers packed up their dejected dreams and left, a strange quiet returned to the woods. The land was scarred with their holes, but it had, in the end, guarded its real secret. The true treasure was never the jewelry or the coins. It was the mystery itself. And that mystery, now deeper and more profound than ever, remained. Weeks drifted over Ommeren, and slowly, quietly, the village began to find its rhythm again. The last of the treasure hunters packed up their metal detectors and their disappointed dreams and drove away. The holes they left behind were gradually filled in. The raw earth turned over and left to heal. The noise and the frenzy were replaced by the familiar sounds of the countryside, the wind in the trees, the distant lowing of cattle. But something had shifted. The land itself felt different, as if the frantic digging had stirred up more than just soil. It had disturbed a memory, reminding the earth of a pain it had tried its best to forget. The real treasure hunt, it turned out, was never for wealth. It was a search for closure, for a tangible end to a dark chapter. And in a way, the empty box provided it, but not in the manner anyone had hoped. That hollow, rusted container became a powerful metaphor. It represented the void left by the war itself, the stolen lives, the broken families, the legacies that were looted and could never be truly recovered. The speechlessness of the treasure hunters standing over that empty hole mirrored the speechlessness we all feel when confronted with the sheer scale of that loss. The true thing that was stolen was peace, normality, and security. And that is not something you can ever dig up with a shovel. So, the final, unanswered question remains: hanging in the damp Dutch air like a ghost. The map was undeniably real. The ammunition boxes were real. But the treasure is gone. So, where did it go? Perhaps it was found long ago. The coins melted down, the diamonds sold off, its bloody history erased for a few pieces of silver. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it still lies somewhere else, under a different tree, in a field no one has guessed, waiting for another map, another rumor, another generation to be captured by its glittering promise. The woods of Ommeren are quiet now, but they hold their secret closer than ever. The past is never truly dead. It's just waiting, buried, for someone else to listen.